Hello everyone. Tonight, we begin with the kind of night that doesn't care if you're tired, anxious, or wearing 5 layers of technical fabric. The kind of night that looks at your central heating and laughs in tundra. We're talking about what happens when the sun disappears for 20 hours. The wind claws at your tent, and your only source of warmth is a frozen reindeer hide and the body heat of someone you barely know. From babies breastfeeding at -30 degrees Celsius, to toddlers herding livestock while you're still trying to tie your boots, to a communal blanket system where if you snore too loud, you sleep by the flap. This is the story of people who don't survive the cold, they build lives inside it, and of what happens when someone like you, soft, well-meaning, terminally modern, tries to join them for just one night. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually want to. No pressure. I won't freeze to death if you don't, probably. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is on your end of the world. I'd love to know who's watching from summer while we crawl through snow. Now, dim the lights, maybe put on a second pair of socks, just in case. And if you've got a cup of tea nearby, let it steam gently beside you. Because we're about to enter the cold and the culture of those who call winter home. Let's begin. Let me tell you about the person you could have been. Not the one who complains when the office thermostat dips below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. No, I mean the version of you born into a place where the wind alone could murder you before breakfast. A you who didn't sleep under duvets, but under layers of reindeer hide, huddled between your cousin's feet and your grandmother's breath. A version of yourself that would have taken one look at a smart blanket and laughed until their lungs froze. If you had been born into a nomadic winter camp somewhere in the endless folds of Siberia, say among the Nenets or Awenki, this would have been your life. Nights at -40 degrees Celsius, mornings that bite your eyelids off, and an unspoken understanding that comfort is just a colonial myth. You wouldn't survive the night, and not because you're weak, but because you're modern, because your idea of cold is when your cappuccino arrives lukewarm. Meanwhile, these people measure cold by whether or not the spit freezes before it hits the ground. Spoiler, it usually does. The cold here doesn't chill, it assaults, it doesn't nip, it gnaws. You step outside to pee and realize your eyelashes have turned into tiny white spears. Your nostrils snap shut like scared oysters. Your breath curls mid-air and hangs there like it's reconsidering its life choices. You learn quickly that skin is not an organ, it's a liability. There's no moonlit glow or cozy hush in this kind of night. Just the sound of snow creaking under reindeer hooves, and your joints wondering if it's time to give up. Heat escapes from your body like gossip fast, and always through the people you trusted most. Fingers, toes, ears, they're the first to abandon you. And once they go, it's a game of musical hypothermia until your whole body folds. And yet, you don't scream. Not because you're brave, but because screaming means opening your mouth. And opening your mouth means wind inside your lungs, and wind inside your lungs means death by atmospheric arrogance. So you hold it in. Everyone does. Whole families move through the dark like wrapped-up ghosts. You don't talk, you mutter, you don't walk, you crunch. Inside the tent, and we'll get to that marvel of animal architecture soon, it's not exactly warm either, just less fatal. The fire burns low to save fuel, and the smoke sometimes refuses to leave, because even smoke has survival instincts. You sit there blinking through the haze, layered in more hides than a Viking conquest, and you wonder how long it takes for a toe to go from numb to no longer mine. But here's the trick. These people aren't suffering, they're surviving. Actually, they're thriving, in a way that makes your thermal underwear cry out in existential despair. They're not checking weather apps, they are the weather app. They've read the clouds, the snowdrift shadows, the taste of the wind, and when it drops to -50 degrees Celsius, they don't panic. They just tighten their fur belts and melt a bit more snow. Meanwhile, you're still standing at the entrance of the tent, quietly panicking because you've just realized you're sweating from fear, and in these temperatures, that's suicide. Sweat is the kiss of death. It freezes faster than you can say North Face, and the ice trapped in your clothes becomes your final, frosty betrayal. You know what's worse? This is just the welcome party. The night hasn't even started yet. You've got 8 hours of pitch black, bladder control, and questionable survival instincts ahead of you. So let's go inside, to the place they call home. Spoiler, it's made of sticks and reindeer skins, and it's still smarter than your apartment. If you'd been born into this life, this cold-blooded ballet of wind, fire, and reindeer dung, your idea of home wouldn't involve bricks, insulation, or anything as decadent as central heating. No, home would have been a cone-shaped structure made from 40 or so wooden poles, held together with tendon and stubbornness, and covered entirely in reindeer hides. That's it. That's the blueprint. IKEA would weep. The Nenets call it a chum. The Owenki and Duca have their own names for it, but the concept's the same. A soft fortress stitched from fur and sheer willpower. It doesn't have a door. Not really, just a flap you pray the wind doesn't rip open. And it doesn't have windows because windows are what kill people out here. Glass is for people who think the cold is pretty. The people who live here, they know it's a predator. Now, I know what you're thinking. How warm can a tent made of meat and sticks really be? Well, warm enough, but only if you do it exactly right. If the skins are stretched too tight, they crack in the cold. Too loose, and the wind slides in like a thief. And if the structure isn't pitched at the right angle, congratulations, you've built a lovely snow collection device. Inside, the space is small, smoky, and sacred. Sacred not in a poetic sense, although that too, but in the practical. If this tent fails, we all die sense. The fire burns in the center, usually fueled by what the reindeer left behind, and the family fans out around it like spokes in a survival wheel. Everything revolves around that fire. Sleep, meals, gossip, the occasional ritual sacrifice of personal space. There's no furniture, no area rugs, just hides layered thick over frozen earth, with sleeping spaces divided by fur curtains or sheer habit. The warmest spot goes to the eldest or the most fragile, often a baby wrapped so tightly they resemble a taxidermied emotion. The coldest spot goes to ... you, because you're new, soft, and already sweating again. The smoke, it doesn't leave the way you think it should. There's a vent hole at the top technically, but when it's minus 40 degrees Celsius outside, that hole turns into a frozen ring of passive-aggressive airflow. The smoke rises, tries to escape, changes its mind, and then settles low enough to season your lungs. By morning, you've smoked a full pack of unfiltered tundra. You're starting to realize now, this isn't camping. This isn't even glamping's third cousin. This is architecture with no margin for error. This is design that remembers the Ice Age and looks at your studio apartment like it's a banana republic. This is a home that breathes barely, and only because a line of ancestral women knew exactly how to stitch hide to pole without letting death in. You want to sit, squat. You want to nap. Hope someone likes you enough to scoot over. You want to cry. Do it quietly. Water freezes fast, and nobody here wants to deal with icicle emotions. And just when you're thinking, okay, maybe I can handle this, you realize the fire's dying. And guess whose turn it is to go outside and fetch more fuel? Go on. Step back out into the dark, but don't get too comfortable. Because after this, it's time to sleep. And sleep, my friend, is an Olympic sport out here. So now you've hauled in an armload of frozen reindeer dung like it's the world's worst bouquet, chucked it into the stove, nearly choked on the smoke, and managed to get the fire sputtering just enough to convince the family not to exile you. You think you've earned rest. You haven't, because sleep here, sleep is a battlefield. And you, poor soul, just brought a rubber spoon to a bone-chilling war. First, let's talk beds. There aren't any. The ground is your mattress, snow-packed and unforgiving, a solid slab of frozen memory foam. If memory foam had trauma and the distinct scent of animal fat, over it, a few stitched reindeer hides, supple on top, still vaguely attached to nature on the bottom. You lie down and instantly feel your body negotiating terms with hypothermia. You don't sleep alone, not because it's romantic, but because it's suicidal. Everyone packs in like a litter of survival puppies, shoulder to shoulder, back to back, thigh to armpit, breath to forehead. Babies are swaddled and tucked beneath adults, like sacred squirming hot water bottles. The rule is, share heat or lose toes, sometimes both. Your boots stay on. If they come off, your feet may never forgive you. Same goes for gloves. Your hands nest under someone's belly or inside your coat, next to skin that isn't yours. No one asks permission. There is no modesty in mortality. You're wearing everything you own, and it's still not enough. Under the hides, the cold doesn't attack so much as seep. It slides in behind your knees, slips into your collar, nestles under your tailbone like an unwanted spirit. Every time someone shifts, the carefully hoarded heat escapes, and you all collectively shiver like synchronized swimmers in a nightmare. And if you think you'll be able to fall asleep to the gentle crackle of firewood, think again. That crackling, that's the sound of ice forming on the inside of the tent. The fire's dying again. Someone has to get up to feed it. And guess who they're eyeing? That's right, the newcomer. The one who hasn't yet earned the sacred right to sleep uninterrupted. You try to fake sleep, but it's useless. Someone prods you with a stick, a gentle yet deeply judgmental gesture. You groan, crawl out from under the pile, and crawl into a reality so cold it makes your soul clench. Outside, your breath crystallizes before it leaves your mouth. The world is black, silent, and wide as death. You fumble for the fuel, toss it in, and pray the flames catch before your fingers do. Back inside, everyone's asleep again. You squeeze into your allotted 6 inches of floor, wedge your elbow between a rib cage and a thigh, and lay there blinking. Not because you're uncomfortable, that's a given, but because your mind is racing with the knowledge that if you fall asleep the wrong way, face exposed, boot slipped, sweat still cooling, you might not wake up, and still, ... No one here is scared, except you. They snore softly, they dream. Some even smile. You, on the other hand, are busy developing a whole new respect for your eyelids because they're freezing shut. But don't worry, morning is coming. And with it, a trip to the bathroom, or rather, the lack of one. Let me be extremely clear about this. There is no toilet. There is no outhouse, no composting seat with a scenic view, no charming bucket in the corner. If you had been born into a nomadic winter camp, the closest thing you'd get to a bathroom is a patch of snow that nobody else has blessed yet. Privacy, optional. Hypothermia, guaranteed. And when nature calls, as it always does, usually at the worst possible moment, you don't have options. You have obligations. You unzip your tent flap, step into a darkness so total it feels like you've been swallowed by an ice demon, and then you try to remember which direction doesn't lead to wolves. Your boots crunch across snow that might be 2 feet deep or 10, depending on how many blizzards have buried the trail. There is no path. There is no light. Just the shrieking silence of a -40 night and the creeping realization that your bladder is not the only thing at risk of bursting. Every instinct in your modern body screams, this is wrong, and it is. Evolution did not prepare you to squat on a sub-zero tundra, balancing on numb toes, unzipping layers of fur and felt while wind knives its way into your core memories. You don't go, you negotiate. You plead with your muscles to work faster than the frostbite. You pray the wind doesn't change direction, and whatever you do not, under any circumstances, let your bare skin touch metal. By the time you shuffle back to the tent, you've lost sensation in 3 fingers, 1 ear, and possibly part of your dignity. You were outside for maybe 3 minutes. It felt like 3 lifetimes. And now you're expected to fall asleep again, as if your soul hasn't just partially detached from your body. Now, the locals, they don't flinch. They've got the squat angle down to an art form. Their layers are strategically tied for easy, dare I say graceful, maneuvering. Some of them don't even leave the tent. They use a designated pot, carefully placed, emptied later with all the reverence of a sacred ritual. You're not trusted with the pot yet. Hygiene here isn't about antiseptic wipes or cucumber-scented soap. It's about not dying of infection. You melt snow to wash your hands. You use rough cloth, moss, or sometimes nothing at all. Your immune system gets stronger or it doesn't. There's no middle ground. There are rules, of course. You don't go near the reindeer. You don't go too close to the tent. And you definitely don't do your business upstream of the snowmelt. Break those rules, and you might not die from the cold. You might just be shunned to the outskirts of the next migration. You're starting to understand now, aren't you? Out here, your body isn't a temple. It's a project. High maintenance, delicate, inconvenient, and you've still got one more basic need to handle. Thirst. If you thought the bathroom situation was humbling, wait until you try to get a drink of water. In the real world, your world, hydration is as easy as turning a knob or scanning a QR code for electrolyte-enhanced lavender mist. But out here, in a nomadic winter camp where temperatures drop low enough to freeze vodka solid, water is a intensive, soul-crushing activity performed by the strong, the disciplined, and the severely dehydrated. Let's begin with the obvious. There is no running water, not even limping water. Everything liquid is solid. Rivers, frozen, snow. Yes, technically everywhere, but snow isn't water, not real water. It's frozen air pretending to be helpful. So, how do you get a drink? Simple. You melt snow. And by melt, I mean spend the next 2 hours hovering over a stove, fueled by animal dung, feeding it handful after handful of powdery nothingness, just to produce a cup of lukewarm disappointment. And that's if you do it right. Melt the wrong snow, too icy, too dirty, or scraped from the wrong spot, and you get grit, pine needles, or something suspiciously yellow that wasn't there an hour ago. Snow has the moisture content of dry sarcasm. You need a whole pot of it to fill a single mug. It's the culinary equivalent of wringing soup out of a napkin. Now imagine you're doing this while wearing 3 layers of fur, in a tent with questionable ventilation, while someone's elderly aunt is drying fish 5 feet away. The smoke burns your eyes, the fire keeps going out, and your pot keeps tipping because the ground is frozen unevenly. You're not making tea, you're surviving. Locals, of course, make it look effortless. They have the muscle memory of generations, the instincts of snow whisperers, and the patience of monks. You've already burned your glove, singed your eyebrows, and somehow managed to spill half the water back into the snowbank from which it came. And God help you if you spill the final product. Because out here, every drop of drinkable water is sacred. It's not just thirst quenching, it's life prolonging. Water isn't a luxury, it's a rationed privilege. People notice, people remember. But here's the most dangerous part. In extreme cold, you forget you're thirsty. The body suppresses signals. You breathe in dry, frozen air all day, lose moisture through your lungs, and think you're fine. Until you're dizzy, sluggish, and your urine looks like it's trying to send a distress signal. Dehydration in Arctic environments is one of those ironic little death traps. You're surrounded by water, and still your cells shrivel like they're auditioning for a raisin cult. Drink too little, and you freeze. Drink too late, and you hallucinate. There is no refresh and hydrate here. There's just melt or perish. So after 2 hours, 3 burns, and 1 minor stove-related panic attack, you finally hold in your trembling hands a cup of warm snowmelt. It tastes like smoke, wet fur, and the barest hint of triumph. You gulp it down, heart pounding, and then it hits you. You have to pee again, but this time, you're not just racing to the snow, you're dodging toddlers, elders, and a reindeer that doesn't like you. Because the next thing you're about to learn is that even the children here are tougher than you. You've drunk your smoky cup of snow tea, nearly frozen your intestines trying to relieve yourself behind a drift, and now you're crawling back into the tent like a damp, confused marmot. You're thinking, surely this earns you some sort of honorary respect, maybe a blanket, maybe a nod. But as you peel back the flap, you're met with the small, unbothered face of a child, about 5 years old, holding a blade, not menacingly, just casually, because she's been whittling a reindeer sled runner since before you finished boiling water, and she's better at it than you'll ever be. Welcome to your next humiliation. If you had been born in a nomadic winter camp, your childhood would not have included cartoon marathons, participation trophies, or a safe space to process your feelings. You would have been sharpening knives before you could pronounce the word knife. And instead of toy trucks, you'd be hauling firewood twice your body weight, and not complaining, because complaining gets you the look. By age 6, most nomadic kids in the Arctic know how to build a stove fire, milk a reindeer, and skin a fish, sometimes all before breakfast. While you were learning the emotional nuances of Bluey, they were learning that forgetting to tie down a tent flap could mean losing your home to the wind. There's a 6-year-old boy dragging a sled past you now. His boots are patched with fur, his cheeks are raw with windburn, and he has the stoic expression of a man who's seen too much. He doesn't wave, he's too busy. He's hauling dung for the fire you couldn't keep lit. You sit there, stunned, watching these tiny humans operate like miniature survivalists. They don't giggle, they don't whine. They eat frozen raw meat like it's jerky and barely flinch when wind rips through the seams of the tent. One girl is bottle feeding a reindeer calf. Another is sewing a torn hide with tendon thread, her fingers moving fast and blind, the way yours do when you're texting a breakup paragraph at 2 a.m. And they're watching you too, not unkindly, just ... confused. You're red in the face, overlayered wheezing from a walk, and still blinking smoke out of your eyelashes. You are, to them, a kind of sad, fleshy novelty. A talking snowman who hasn't yet realized he's melting. Their parents don't intervene. They don't praise or correct. They let the kids work. fail, fall, recover. Strength here isn't a personality trait. It's a daily rehearsal for life. And weakness is a luxury item no one can afford to carry on the next migration. You try to help, you really do. You offer to carry a bucket of water. It's rejected politely, because that job belongs to a child who is clearly more qualified. You smile at one of the kids. They smile back, but it's the kind of smile people give tourists who don't understand the bus map. And then the baby cries. No one rushes. No one panics. The mother doesn't stand. She shifts, bears a breast under 5 layers of hide, and the child latches without fanfare. It's -30°C. The wind howls, and a baby is breastfeeding. It's the most normal thing in the world, because here, it is. You begin to realize, you're not living with them. You're surviving around them. But don't worry, the night's still young, and you've got fire duty. Again. Because next, we need to talk about why fire is your only friend, and your most temperamental one. Out here, there's no electricity, no backup generator, no emergency heater hiding in a closet like a safety net. Fire is it. It's the only thing standing between you and becoming a very pale, very floppy ice sculpture. Which is why it's unfortunate that fire in a nomadic winter camp is also a complete diva. You don't light a fire here, you negotiate with it. And it always knows when you're new. In the middle of the tent, always the middle, stands the stove, a metal box, or sometimes just a ring of stones and iron welded into usefulness. It doesn't have buttons, it doesn't have dials, it doesn't care if you're cold. It's fed with wood if you're lucky, or dung if you're realistic. Yes, dung, dried, compact, reindeer, certified fuel, stacked like sacred bricks of survival. Your job, keep it going, all night, without burning down the tent or killing everyone inside with smoke. Because fire, for all its warmth and light, also happens to be a little homicidal. Feed it too fast, and smoke pours out the seams like a demon's exhale. Too slow, and it dies, along with your chance of making it to breakfast with all your fingers. Let the pipe clog. Carbon monoxide. Don't latch the hatch properly. Flaming tent. Fall asleep without stoking it. Death by poetic irony. You, of course, screw it up immediately. Your first attempt to relight it, after being handed the sacred dung bundle with the seriousness of a nuclear warhead, ends with you blowing ash into your own eyes and coughing like a Victorian orphan. Someone takes the bundle back from you wordlessly and does it in 4 smooth motions that somehow feel like judgment incarnate. The locals, they treat the fire like an old friend who occasionally bites. They know its moods. They read the sparks. They adjust for wind, humidity, snow clumps stuck to fuel. The kids poke it casually. The elders barely look, and you're crouched there like Gollum trying to roast a shoe, praying your nose hairs don't ignite. And then there's the smoke. Oh, the smoke. It doesn't rise. It lingers. It hovers, just at eye level, curling into your nostrils like a lazy burglar. Your eyes water. Your throat burns. You blink rapidly and try not to cry, not out of pain, but out of shame, because everyone else seems immune. They've got calloused lungs and tear-resistant retinas. You've got a sinus infection and second-hand embarrassment. By the 3rd time you accidentally open the stove to wide and singe your gloves. Someone finally sighs and puts you on firewatch duty instead, which means sitting up at 3 a.m. and staring at the embers like a spiritual intern while the rest of the camp sleeps in a warm, collective tangle of earned competence. You try to stay awake. You really do, but the warmth lulls you. Your head dips, the fire sputters, and just as the chill creeps in, you hear it, the subtle rustle of someone getting up to fix what you've broken. You've failed at fire, and your punishment, you get to learn about clothing next. Because tomorrow, they expect you to go outside. And trust me, if you dress like a city dweller, the cold will eat you alive and leave your zippers as a warning. Now, let me explain something before you get cocky about that down jacket of yours. If you step outside wearing synthetic layers and a sense of entitlement, the cold will not simply bother you. It will file paperwork to remove you from existence. That coat you bought from the sportswear catalog, the one rated for extreme conditions. Out here, it's basically a wet napkin. Because in a nomadic winter camp, clothing isn't fashion. It's not even protection. It's a system, a sacred, learned, slowly evolved response to climate hostility. Every stitch, every layer, every loop of tendon thread has a purpose. And none of those purposes include looking good for Instagram. If you'd been born here, You'd have known from toddlerhood how to dress like your life depended on it, because it does. The rule is simple: never sweat, never freeze. Sound easy? It's not. You must wear just enough to trap your heat, but not so much that you overheat, because once you sweat, you're done. That moisture becomes ice, and that ice becomes frostbite, and that frostbite becomes a bedtime story about that one visitor who didn't listen. The people here wear reindeer hide, fur side in, skin side out. It's breathable, it's insulating, and it's been keeping humans alive at -50 degrees Celsius since before your ancestors figured out how to boil pasta. These aren't casual pelts either. They're custom tailored, passed down through generations, and hand-stitched using sinew, bone needles, and deep ancestral wisdom. You, however, are waddling around like a polyester burrito, already sweating because you thought layering 3 sweaters under a ski jacket would help. It didn't. Now you're wet, itchy, and about to learn what a wind tunnel of shame feels like. Let's break down the outfit. A full-body tunic made of reindeer hide is worn over your base layers. Underneath, more fur, or wool, if you're fancy. Then there are the torbasa, or boots, fur-lined, often packed with hay or moss to absorb moisture. Yes, moss, nature's forgotten sock. Gloves, reindeer hide again, or sometimes the skin of small animals. You're given a pair. You drop them. The toddler picks them up and looks at you like you just failed a national exam. And then there's the belt. Never forget the belt. It's not for fashion. It's to keep the heat trapped and the layers sealed. One gap, and the wind finds you. And when it doesn't stop at your ribs, it explores, it investigates, it makes you question your place in the food chain. Even how you move matters. Out here, walking too fast is dangerous. You generate heat. That heat becomes sweat. That sweat becomes death. So everyone moves like slow, silent bears, efficient, graceful, unbothered. You're puffing like a steam engine, your breath fogging your borrowed goggles, and your armpits steaming like shame-flavored tea. The elders glance at you, not with malice, just pity, like they're watching a squirrel try to open a can of soup. But somehow, you make it through your first properly dressed expedition. You've wrapped yourself in half a reindeer, walked like a hibernating monk, and almost avoided sweating. You return to the tent wheezing, red-faced and triumphant. Then you try to take off your boots. They're frozen shut, which is just as well, because dinner's almost ready, and tonight's menu includes something special: raw, frozen meat, served straight from the blade. So, you've barely survived the walk. Your boots are now permanently fused to your body, and your sweat glands are whispering threats. But finally, it's time to eat. You imagine something hot, steaming, maybe a stew, maybe anything not actively trying to give you frostbite. What you get instead is a slab of raw frozen reindeer meat and a knife. Welcome to dinner. If you'd been born into a nomadic winter camp, food would never be served. It would be carved, often directly from a frozen carcass that's been preserved, not by refrigeration but by the brutal generosity of the wind. The dish of the day could be stroganina, thin, curling slices of frozen fish or meat, shaved off in ribbons with surgical precision. No seasoning, no garnish, just knife to jaw. You sit down. Someone hands you a hunk of what looks like meat, but feels like polished marble. It's darker than you expected, denser. You go to bite it. Mistake, your teeth scream. A woman in the corner smirks and hands you a proper blade. Right, no forks, just cut and suck. That's the method. Protein is everywhere, just not how you imagined it. Reindeer meat is a staple: heart, liver, bone marrow, blood. Sometimes cooked, often not. The blood, it's warm when fresh, and used in soups, pancakes, and rituals, and occasionally all three at once. You're offered a cup. It's rich, salty, still steaming slightly. You hesitate. They watch. You drink. And honestly, it's not bad. Vegetables, rare, imported, expensive. You might get a turnip if someone's feeling fancy. But mostly, it's meat, fat, and fish, caught before the river froze, preserved in blocks of ice, and chiseled out like precious artifacts, and butter. Glorious animal fat-laden butter that melts in the firelight and keeps hearts pumping at temperatures where hearts shouldn't. You glance around and see a toddler gnawing on a frozen hunk of backstrap like it's a pacifier. No one bats an eye. Someone else is scooping frozen marrow with a handmade spoon carved from antler. You've never felt so, Domestically underachieving. The food isn't just fuel, It's insulation. Fat keeps you alive. Protein keeps you moving. Your body becomes a furnace that burns meat into motion. You don't count calories out here. You worship them. And yes, they cook sometimes, usually during communal feasts or when preparing something ceremonial. But even then, it's minimal. Fuel is precious. Raw is faster. And frozen means preserved. You've got 5 minutes to eat before it reverts to a rock. Better chew fast. There's also sharing. No plates, no portions, just hands, knives, nods. You pass the blade. You offer a slice. You take one in return. It's not just politeness, it's trust. You share what you have, or you don't last long. By the end of the meal, your jaw aches, your lips are numb, and your stomach is both horrified and grateful. You've consumed enough cholesterol to concern a cardiologist, but somehow, you feel stronger, warmer, alive in a way that scares you. And just when you think you can lean back and digest, you're shushed, hard. Because now, it's time for silence. And not the peaceful kind. The kind that could save your life. So you've eaten your raw, frozen meat, like a mildly terrified predator. You've slurped blood soup next to toddlers. You've passed the communal knife without injuring anyone. You're starting to think, okay, maybe I'm getting the hang of this. And then, someone shushes you. No one's mad, no one's glaring. Just a simple, sharp hush that cuts cleaner than the bone knife you just used on dinner. Because in a nomadic winter camp, silence isn't politeness. It isn't social awkwardness. It isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of awareness. A survival tactic as finely tuned as a reindeer's ear or a hunter's heartbeat. If you'd grown up here, you'd have known instinctively that too much noise, even just your idiot laugh echoing against the snow, could mean disaster. Sound carries across the tundra like rumors in a royal court. Loud footfalls, they send reindeer scattering across the ice. Sudden laughter, it alerts predators. A dropped pot, that's how you lose an entire herd to panic. Or worse, you draw wolves, or men, and between the two, only the wolves are honest. The wind already howls, the snow already crunches, the ice creaks beneath your sled. That's all the symphony anyone needs. So people here move softly, speak sparsely, and listen like their lives depend on it, because they do. Even the children are quiet. Not because they're well behaved, but because they've been taught from their first breath that silence keeps the family warm, fed, and uneaten. Babies are trained to nurse without noise. Toddlers play without shrieks. And if one of them cries too loudly at night, someone doesn't yell. They rap, they rock, they cradle the sound back into stillness. You, however, keep clearing your throat, and they notice. You fidget with your boots. You sigh after every sentence. You ask why it's so quiet loudly. The group doesn't scold you, but their glances say it all. This one might get us all killed by a snow leopard or an avalanche, and we haven't even finished boiling the bones yet. Conversation still happens, of course, but it's strategic, efficient, rhythmic. Phrases are short, words are precise. You don't waste breath on small talk when the temperature could make that breath freeze mid-air. Gossip exists, sure, but it's whispered during sewing, exchanged while repairing a sled, murmured while tying rope with fingers that barely feel anymore. Even the animals have learned. The dogs bark only when it matters. The reindeer move like ghosts. The entire camp breathes in a kind of hush that feels holy, not out of reverence, but out of evolution. You start to feel it too. Not fear, not exactly, but a kind of pressure. Like the snow itself is listening. Every sound you make is being recorded by the frost. Your modern impulse to fill every silence. Out here, that impulse is just another weakness exposed to the air. So you sit still. You listen. To the wind whispering through hide. To the fire's gentle sigh. To your own heartbeat, loud in your ears. And suddenly, you understand. Out here, silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of respect. But don't get too comfortable. You've been sitting long enough, and now it's time to earn your keep. Because if you can't contribute, you're just extra weight on the sled. The quiet settles in. The fire cracks politely. You've finally stopped fidgeting, and for one brief moment, you're proud of yourself. Maybe you're adapting. Maybe you're part of this now. Maybe no, absolutely not. Because the moment you exhale with even a whisper of self-satisfaction, someone hands you a bucket. No explanation. Just a nod. A child, maybe 8 years old, motions toward the riverbank, or what used to be a river. Now it's just ice. Thick, stubborn, deeply uninterested in being helpful. And you realize it's your turn to fetch water. Now, if you'd been born into this life, if you'd grown up in the quiet churn of migration, ritual, and survival, you would have known that this wasn't a punishment, it was a test. Because out here, no one gets a free ride. Not elders, not children, definitely not confused visitors with puffed up parkas and sore thighs. You pull your weight, or someone else has to pull you, which is inefficient. So you go. Your boots still squeak like an apology. The air bites your nose again. You trudge toward the ice, with the bucket swinging wildly, already plotting your escape. You'll just chip a little, grab a handful, bring back enough to show effort. Surely that's you arrive and discover the hole, already cut. You're not even the first today. The ice has been carved through, methodically, daily, by someone more competent than you'll ever be. The surface reforms in hours, so the hole is kept open with precision. A reindeer shinbone stick keeps it marked. You kneel, you lower the bucket. The wind howls, your gloves slip, water splashes, onto your knees. Congratulations, you've just violated the first law of Arctic chores. Don't get wet. Now your pants are freezing to your legs, and the ice at the rim is fusing to your glove. You wrestle the bucket back, shivering. The water is cloudy, probably full of twigs, and failure. Back at camp, you hand over the bucket. No one says anything. They don't have to. Someone pours it carefully into a pot. Someone else wrinkles their nose. You've just made soup harder. You are now that person. Every role here matters. Someone stitches, someone repairs, sled runners, someone cuts firewood, someone trains the dogs. And yes, someone fetches water without spilling half of it onto their own crotch. Tasks rotate, but the expectation never does. You work. There is no retirement, no rest day, no opt-out clause for emotional overwhelm. If your fingers function, they're mending fur. If your legs work, they're herding reindeer. If your lungs breathe, they're singing children to sleep or calling dogs back from the ridge. Even elders contribute through stories, through warnings, through wisdom distilled in frown lines. You try to make yourself useful. You offer to help with the sled. A 7-year-old is already fixing it. You try to stoke the fire. Someone moves you aside. You sweep the tent floor, badly. Eventually, you're handed a pile of hide scraps and a dull bone, all woman gestures. Poke holes, stitch them, do not complain. You sit, you poke, you stab your finger. You bleed a little into the fur. She notices, she shrugs. It'll dry. And for the first time, you feel it. Not belonging, not pride, but a kind of uneasy acceptance. You are not skilled, you are not necessary, but at least, for now, you're trying. But don't relax, because while you're here struggling with scraps, something outside the tent just snorted, and that means it's time to meet the real masters of this world. That snort outside the tent, that was not a warning, that was not a threat, that was a reindeer clearing its throat in the way royalty might clear theirs before demanding tribute. Because out here, reindeer aren't just animals, they're currency, they're kin. They are the reason anyone survives. If you'd been born into this world, you wouldn't have drawn reindeer in a picture book. You'd have worn one, eaten one, ridden one, thanked one for keeping you alive last winter, and prepared to say goodbye to another during spring migration. It's not sentiment, it's symbiosis. These creatures provide everything: meat, milk, hides, bones, sinew, tools, transport, fuel. Their dung fuels the fire. Their tendons become thread. Their hides line the tent. And their meat, whether raw, dried, or frozen, keeps hearts pumping when the world outside wants you frozen and forgotten. You step outside to meet them. They're waiting. Dozens of them, shaggy, wide-hoofed, inscrutable. Their breath puffs out like smoke. Their eyes dark and horizontal, study you without concern. They know what you are. Temporary. You, the human. Them, the institution. You try to get close. One snorts again, louder this time, and takes 2 steps back. Another one stomps once, just enough to tell you, you're in my way. Walking scarf. The herders, of course, move through them like water. No drama, no sound, just gestures, eye contact, a rhythm learned from infancy. A child clicks their tongue. A dozen animals shift direction. A woman lifts a rope, and the group clusters. It's choreography. You trip over a hoofprint and almost kiss the snow. You're told, or rather motioned, to help bring one of the reindeer closer. not the big ones. A mid-sized sturdy female with a bell around her neck. Easy, you reach for the halter. She spins, bolts sideways, and you're suddenly trying to maintain dignity while face-planting into powdered ice. Laughter bubbles behind you. Not cruel, just expected. The reindeer trots off, unimpressed. A boy no older than 12 catches her without breaking stride. Because they've grown up with these animals, lived through storms with them, slept beside them. You once took a llama selfie on vacation. Not the same. Milking. That's a whole other ordeal. It's done fast, efficiently, and often in temperatures where the milk freezes midstream. You try. The reindeer side-eyes you so hard you apologize. A grandmother shows you how. You nod respectfully, then get elbowed in the ribs by a 200-pound animal who has no interest in being part of your bucket list. But they're not just beasts of burden. These animals are sacred infrastructure. Entire migration routes are planned around their rhythms. Festivals are timed to their breeding. Naming ceremonies happen with their hooves, clopping softly in the background. And in winter, they are the only reason anyone gets anywhere. You try pulling a sled. You last 20 feet before collapsing dramatically. Then you watch a reindeer haul triple that distance, carrying firewood, a child, and someone's mother, without blinking. Their hooves are wide and flexible, designed to move over snow like whispers. Their noses warm the air before it reaches their lungs. They are engineered by evolution to succeed in the exact place you're still struggling to pee correctly. So you back off, you give them space, you nod at one like it's your superior officer. It flicks an ear at you and continues chewing. You've learned your place in the hierarchy now. Reindeer first, everyone else distant second. But don't worry, the snow is falling again. Night's creeping in. And now it's time for something deeper. Not cold, the sky. The endless, crushing, soul-bending sky. At first, you think the silence is the most oppressive thing. But then the clouds break, and you realize the real weight isn't around you, it's above you. If you had been born into this life, if you had grown up migrating beneath the winter heavens, walking for days across whites so vast it erases even memory, you wouldn't find the sky beautiful. You'd find it watchful. Heavy, like a god that's tired of being thanked, and just wants you to shut up and keep walking. Because in a nomadic winter camp, the sky isn't a background, it's a presence, and in winter, it's there all the time. Sometimes black, sometimes grey, sometimes that weird soul-flattening color that looks like someone bleached the void. You look up expecting stars. You get nothing. You look up hoping for a moon. It's just a smudge. You look up, trying to orient yourself, and realize the sky has no interest in helping. During Arctic winters, there can be 20 hours of darkness. Not cozy, snuggly darkness. Not warm lamp, fire crackle, read a book, darkness. No, this is the kind of dark that outlasts your thoughts. The kind that seeps into your bones and starts rearranging the furniture. People born here know how to handle it. They don't panic when the sun doesn't rise until noon and sets again by 3:15. They don't spiral into existential dread just because it's been 14 days since they saw a shadow. You're already hearing voices. One of them might be your own. Time dissolves. The sky does that. Your brain, used to light as a marker for meaning, meals, moods, circadian rhythms, starts losing track. Did we already eat? Is it still today? Has it always been night? You look at your watch. It says 9:14 a.m. You consider burning it. The sky in these parts isn't passive. It's a mirror. It reflects back every doubt you've tried to bury under sarcasm. It whispers that you don't belong here, that the reindeer know it, that the children saw it the moment you failed to light the fire properly. You tell yourself this is ridiculous, and the sky says nothing, which is worse. And yet, the people here are calm. They move slowly under that black dome. They tell stories. They sing softly while sewing. They chew frozen meat like prophets waiting for spring. They've lived their entire lives beneath this cosmic pressure, and somehow they're not crushed. They're shaped by it. You ask how they deal with it. Someone shrugs. You get used to it. That's it. No self-help. No hacks. No apps with gentle chimes and whale sounds. Just acceptance. You try. You sit outside the tent, wrapped in your furs, face to the void. And for a second, you think, maybe this is what meditation feels like. Then your left eyelid freezes shut, and a dog pees near your boot. Enlightenment delayed. Still, you stay. Because even though it's vast and cruel and eerily silent, The sky out here has honesty. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't lie. It just is. Immense, indifferent, unapologetically overwhelming. And that's the real lesson. Not everything is about you, not even the sky. But if you're lucky, you get to sleep beneath it one more night. That is, if someone lets you back under the blanket. Because guess what? Warmth here is shared, or not at all. By now, your ego's thawed just enough to realize something critical. Out here, you don't own your body heat. It's not yours to hoard. It's a collective resource, like firewood or silence. And if you're not contributing to it, you'd better get comfortable with the cold, or with being politely, wordlessly excluded from the warmest part of the pile. Because in a nomadic winter camp, warmth is earned and shared with intention. It's not about hospitality, it's about survival math. Who's tired? Who's sick? Who kept the fire going? Who fetched water without tripping over a reindeer turd? Who tried, and who didn't? And tonight, you're the outsider. You're on the edge, literally. When everyone starts crawling under the massive hide blanket, stitched from reindeer skin, and the collective will to not die, you're gently motioned toward the outermost spot, near the tent flap. You nod, smile, say something cheerful like, "I don't mind." You're lying. You mind deeply, because the outer edge is where the wind finds the cracks. It's where your breath freezes on your lips. It's where toes go numb and hope goes to sit quietly in the corner. Meanwhile, at the center of the warmth heap, a grandmother and a baby are nested like royalty. Rightfully so. The middle is for the fragile and the honored. You're neither. You're still the human version of damp socks. You try to snuggle closer. Someone shifts. You're met with the gentle, immovable resistance of people who have been sleeping in these arrangements since before your country even existed. This is choreography, and you don't know the steps. Here, there's no such thing as personal space. There's only functional proximity. People sleep stacked, tucked, folded into each other like soft furred origami. Bodies aligned for warmth, not affection. If your leg is under someone's armpit, that's not intimacy, that's logistics. You learn quickly. Elbows are tolerated, knees less so. Cold feet, absolutely not. You try to slip yours under someone's calf. They flinch, you retract, ashamed. The foot remains cold. Justice is served, and yet ... no one is cruel. They don't mock you. They don't freeze you out completely. They just observe, measure, recalibrate. If you last the night without whining, without flinching away from the toddler drooling on your chest, without waking everyone up when a beetle crawls across your neck, maybe tomorrow night you'll earn a spot closer in. This isn't punishment. It's trust building in sub-zero temperatures. An unspoken question. Can you be relied upon not to steal warmth and give nothing back? You lie there, eyes open, staring at the hide ceiling. You hear someone snore softly. Someone else murmurs in their sleep. The baby coughs once. A hand reaches out in the dark and soothes it. No words, just warmth, redistributed. And that's when you feel it. Not warmth exactly, but the possibility of it. You're no longer shaking. Your breath evens out. A foot brushes yours, and instead of pulling away, it stays. For now, you're tolerated. And out here, that's everything. But don't get dreamy on me. Tomorrow comes fast. And if you thought the people were impressive, wait until you realize that they're still being outperformed by children. Because the next generation doesn't just survive this, they've already surpassed you. So you made it through the night. Sort of. You didn't cry. You didn't shiver loud enough to get kicked. And you only drooled a little bit on someone's sleeve. Congratulations, you've graduated from pitiful guest to quiet liability. But don't get smug, because the camp is already stirring. And by stirring, I mean fully awake, fully dressed, and already productive while you're still trying to figure out if the sound you're hearing is a dog, a child, or your own bones protesting. You stumble out of the tent, eyes squinting against the first grey hint of day, and find that breakfast is underway. Someone is melting snow, someone else is already milking a reindeer, and a 7-year-old is skinning a fish with the casual efficiency of a medieval surgeon. You blink. The world is moving and you are not invited. Because here's the truth, the cold, blunt, unavoidable truth. You're a tourist. You can mimic their clothing, sleep beside their fire, chew their frozen meat, and get quietly frostbitten in all the right places. But they know. The dogs know. Even the wind knows. You're just visiting. They're built for this. Or rather, they've built themselves for this. generation after generation, through memory, ritual, mistake, and instinct, sharpened by the unforgiving truth of snow. They don't check forecasts. They don't need survival guides. They are survival. You, on the other hand, have nearly slipped and died 3 times just trying to carry your boots. You ask if the water's ready to drink. A child who is currently stitching up a hide using a needle made from bone glances at you. You just asked if clouds have flavor. And that's the thing. You've spent your entire life thinking endurance looked like gym memberships and stress management apps. But here, endurance has a face. It has calloused hands and wind-burnt cheeks. It's 16 years old and already a master herder. It's 53 and still carrying firewood uphill with a baby on the hip. And the respect they have for the land. It's not poetic. It's not for documentaries. It's necessary. It's visceral. It's fed by cold mornings, by animals that wander off at dusk, by storms that erase campsites like chalk drawings. You're watching them pack now. Efficient, minimal. Everything has a place. The tent folds in under 15 minutes. The sled is loaded in 20. The reindeer are called, harnessed, ready to move. The camp is disappearing like it was never there. Like a breath in snow. You help, or try to. Someone politely redirects you. You carry something small, something light. It's appreciated, but unnecessary. Because even after all this, the fire, the silence, the raw meat and numb limbs, you're still the soft one. The one who can't read the wind. The one who needed help lighting the stove. The one who, if left alone for 20 minutes, would probably start hallucinating warmth and hugging reindeer for comfort. But for one night, you were here, and for the rest of your life, you'll know that survival isn't built in gyms or boardrooms. It's stitched into fur. It's carried in buckets. It's passed hand to hand, silently, beneath a sky that never flinches. And you didn't survive a night in a nomadic winter camp, but you almost did. The cold up there wasn't just unpleasant, it was plotting. It crept in through the tiniest stitch, waited beneath fingernails, and turned breath into ice crystals mid-air, and newborns. They were a liability, soft pink, squirming things with no fat, no fur, and no sense of occasion. If a baby wanted to survive a winter on the tundra, it had to be carried like a secret. So mothers made a second womb, not a metaphorical one. A real, engineered shell of warmth, stitched from seal gut, lined with caribou hair, and tightened with sinew soaked until pliable. The Inuit emodi, that oversized hood pouch slung low on the back, wasn't just clothing, it was life support. It kept the baby flush against the mother's skin, sharing warmth like stolen fire. From a distance, the child vanished completely, not crying, not moving, just pressed flat, like breath held between ribs. But the emoji wasn't passive. It was adjustable, almost architectural. Ties at the waist kept it snug. Flaps opened discreetly for nursing. A mother could walk for hours, hunt, fish, or cut through a snowstorm, and the child would remain untouched by the elements, swaddled in a silence thick with lanolin and steam. You'd think it would be unbearable, being crammed into a damp fur-lined pocket for hours at a time. But that's only if you imagine warmth as a luxury. Out there, it was currency, and no baby cried about being rich. Some mothers layered dried moss into the pouch, not for comfort, for insulation and absorption. Moss was nature's diaper, and it did its job with no crinkling, no scent, and no complaint, because every unnecessary movement, every rustle or wail, risked attracting something, a fox, a spirit, a stranger, that might notice a baby where there shouldn't be one. The emoioti turned the maternal body into a kind of cloaked fortress. Every stitch said, not yours, not yet, and maybe not ever. But of course, even the best fortresses have a weak point, a moment when warmth has to be opened up, just enough to feed, and that's when the silence became urgent. Because sound in the Arctic isn't just heard, it travels. It leaps over frozen lakes, echoes off the ivory cliffs, and slips beneath doors carved from whalebone. A baby's cry could go on for miles, and miles, in that part of the world, often led to something hungry. So infants were trained not to cry. That sounds absurd to anyone with modern parenting books and pastel nurseries, but Arctic mothers weren't trying to soothe for comfort. They were teaching survival. A mother could sense the start of a whimper, the way some people predict earthquakes, a shift in muscle, a flicker of breath, and she'd respond before the sound formed. Pressed skin to skin, rocked gently, a finger stroked along the gums, A lullaby hummed not into the air, but into the back of the neck, where vibrations calmed without making noise. They called it quiet parenting centuries before sleep consultants made it trendy. Not because they preferred the calm, but because silence was the safest sound there was. And when babies forgot, when a sudden wail pierced the wind and made the ravens look up, that was when stories came out. Stories about things that followed noise, spirits that lingered just beyond the hearth, the woman with a mouth full of moss who stole loud children in the night. You'll learn quickly when your mother's voice tightens and she goes still, not angry, just alert, eyes on the horizon, ears tuned to a sound that didn't belong, and then she rocks again, slower this time, barely breathing herself, as if teaching the infant, this is how you disappear. And just like that, warmth wasn't the only thing passed from body to body. The quiet was inherited too, not as repression, but as rhythm. And if the child kept still, if the silence held, then maybe, just maybe, there'd be enough heat left for one more feed. There were no rocking chairs, no swaddled routines in candlelit rooms, no perfect latch tutorials whispered between sips of herbal tea. There was only the wind, and the cold that waited for exposed skin like a jealous god. Nursing, in the Arctic, wasn't an act of intimacy, it was a high-stakes exchange. Seconds mattered. The Amahuti had a built-in solution. Hidden flaps, stitched so discreetly they vanished into the fur's natural curve, allowed mothers to feed without undressing, without turning away from the wind, and without letting the baby's breath solidify mid-air. She'd reach back, twist slightly, and the child would shift, mouth searching with silent precision, latching before the warmth had time to leak out, all while the mother stood, or walked, or sat on ice with her back straight, and eyes scanning the horizon for the next shape that shouldn't be there. Breast milk itself was a kind of miracle. Warm, calorie-rich, immune-boosting, and perhaps most importantly, internal. Firewood was scarce. You couldn't heat a whole hut for one baby, but you could feed them from within. Your own blood turned to cream. And even when food was tight, when the family rationed meat or went without seal fat for days, mothers found a way to keep producing. The body knew what mattered. They didn't call it sacrifice. They didn't call it anything. It was simply what you did. Feed the child, keep it warm, make sure it doesn't cry, and do it all without drawing attention. It wasn't just wolves or whether they were hiding from them. Sometimes it was men, strangers, other clans. Feeding your baby in silence might mean the difference between being seen as a mother or being seen as an opportunity. But there were moments, rare and precious, when the danger thinned, when the fire crackled low, and the snow outside muffled the world, and a mother could pause just long enough to let the infant fall asleep at the breast. Not slowly, in that drifting way that meant the belly was full and the air warm enough to dream. And still, she wouldn't speak. Maybe just her breath brushing against the child's hairline. Because even then, even in safety, quiet was a form of prayer, not to gods, to the frost. And when sleep came, she didn't lay the baby in a cradle or on a mat. That would be far too risky. Instead, she kept it on. Which brings us to the art of sleeping without breaking the silence. 1. The womb. Outside the womb, the cold up there wasn't just unpleasant, it was plotting. It crept in through the tiniest stitch, waited beneath fingernails, and turned breath into ice crystals mid-air. And newborns, they were a liability. Soft pink, squirming things with no fat, no fur, and no sense of occasion. If a baby wanted to survive a winter on the tundra, it had to be carried like a secret. So mothers made a second womb, not a metaphorical one, a real, engineered shell of warmth, stitched from seal gut, lined with caribou hair, and tightened with sinew soaked until pliable. The Inuit Amawati, that oversized hood pouch slung low on the back, wasn't just clothing, it was life support. It kept the baby flush against the mother's skin, sharing warmth like stolen fire. From a distance, the child vanished completely. Not crying, not moving, just pressed flat, like breath held between ribs. But the emojiti wasn't passive, it was adjustable, almost architectural. Ties at the waist kept it snug. Flaps opened discreetly for nursing. A mother could walk for hours, hunt, fish, or cut through a snowstorm, and the child would remain untouched by the elements, swaddled in a silence thick with lanolin and steam. You'd think it would be unbearable, being crammed into a damp fur-lined pocket for hours at a time. But that's only if you imagine warmth as a luxury. Out there, it was currency. and no baby cried about being rich. Some mothers layered dried moss into the pouch, not for comfort, for insulation and absorption. Moss was nature's diaper, and it did its job with no crinkling, no scent, and no complaint, because every unnecessary movement, every rustle or wail, risked attracting something, a fox, a spirit, a stranger that might notice a baby where there shouldn't be one. The Amorti turned the maternal body into a kind of cloaked fortress. Every stitch said, "Not yours, not yet, and maybe not ever." But of course, even the best fortresses have a weak point, a moment when warmth has to be opened up, just enough to feed. And that's when the silence became urgent. No cries in the white silence, because sound in the Arctic isn't just heard, it travels. It leaps over frozen lakes, echoes off the ivory cliffs, and slips beneath doors carved from whalebone. A baby's cry could go on for miles, and miles, in that part of the world, often led to something hungry, so infants were trained not to cry. That sounds absurd to anyone with modern parenting books and pastel nurseries, but Arctic mothers weren't trying to soothe for comfort. They were teaching survival. A mother could sense the start of a whimper, the way some people predict earthquakes, a shift in muscle, a flicker of breath, and she'd respond before the sound formed, pressed skin to skin, rocked gently. A finger stroked along the gums. A lullaby hummed not into the air, but into the back of the neck, where vibrations calmed without making noise. They called it quiet parenting centuries before sleep. Consultants made it trendy. Not because they preferred the calm, but because silence was the safest sound there was. And when babies forgot, when a sudden wail pierced the wind and made the ravens look up, that was when stories came out. Stories about things that followed noise, spirits that lingered just beyond the hearth. The woman with a mouth full of moss, who stole loud children in the night. You learn quickly when your mother's voice tightens and she goes still, not angry, just alert. Eyes on the horizon, ears tuned to a sound that didn't belong, and then she rocks again, slower this time, barely breathing herself, as if teaching the infant, this is how you disappear. And just like that, warmth wasn't the only thing passed from body to body. The quiet was inherited too, not as repression, but as rhythm. And if the child kept still, if the silence held, then maybe, just maybe, there'd be enough heat left for one more feed. There were no rocking chairs, no swaddled routines in candlelit rooms, no perfect latch tutorials whispered between sips of herbal tea. There was only the wind and the cold that waited for exposed skin, like a jealous god. Nursing, in the Arctic, wasn't an act of intimacy, it was a high-stakes exchange. Seconds mattered. The Amorti had a built-in solution. Hidden flaps stitched so discreetly they vanished into the fur's natural curve, allowed mothers to feed without undressing, without turning away from the wind, and without letting the baby's breath solidify mid-air. She'd reach back, twist slightly, and the child would shift, mouth searching with silent precision, latching before the warmth had time to leak out. All while the mother stood, or walked, or sat on ice, with her back straight and eyes scanning the horizon for the next shape that shouldn't be there. Breast milk itself was a kind of miracle, warm, calorie-rich, immune-boosting, and perhaps most importantly, internal. Firewood was scarce. You couldn't heat a whole hut for one baby, but you could feed them from within. Your own blood turned to cream. And even when food was tight, when the family rationed meat or went without seal fat for days, mothers found a way to keep producing. The body knew what mattered. They didn't call it sacrifice. They didn't call it anything. It was simply what you did. Feed the child, keep it warm, make sure it doesn't cry, and do it all without drawing attention. It wasn't just wolves or whether they were hiding from. Sometimes it was men, strangers, other clans. Feeding your baby in silence might mean the difference between being seen as a mother or being seen as an opportunity. But there were moments, rare and precious, when the danger thinned, when the fire crackled low, and the snow outside muffled the world, and a mother could pause just long enough to let the infant fall asleep at the breast. Not quickly, slowly, in that drifting way that meant the belly was full and the air warm enough to dream. And still, she wouldn't speak. Maybe, just her breath brushing against the child's hairline. Because even then, even in safety, quiet was a form of prayer, not to gods, to the frost. And when sleep came, she didn't lay the baby in a cradle or on a mat. That would be far too risky. Instead, she kept it on her, always on her. Which brings us to the art of sleeping without breaking the silence. In the Arctic night, where the wind howls like something ancient with unfinished business, sleep isn't taken, it's negotiated. You don't collapse into it. You slip into it, like you would into a cold river, carefully, with every muscle listening. And for mothers, there was never such a thing as sleeping alone. The infant stayed on her back, inside the moiety, even as she lay down. No transferring, no unwrapping. The pouch simply shifted position from vertical warmth to horizontal cradle, and the baby stayed pressed between her shoulder blades like a second heartbeat, still skin to skin, still wrapped in caribou fur and dried moss and whatever else kept the cold from breathing in. Beds, if they could be called that, were raised platforms layered with skins and thick hides. The idea was to put as much distance as possible between flesh and the frozen ground, but even then, the air snapped like glass if you dared move too fast. So nobody did. Sleep was a choreography of stillness. Mothers learned to turn without jostling, to adjust the feeding position in the dark, mid-dream, without waking either of them. If the baby twitched or whimpered, her hand was already there. Not clapping or rocking, just a firm palm against the chest, the weight of presence reminding the child, we're safe, we're hidden, we're warm. Even lullabies were more suggestion than sound. Sometimes they didn't sing at all. Instead, they breathed a pattern: inhale, exhale, pause, the rhythm of drifting. A kind of hypnosis passed through heat and scent. The baby learned to sleep by mimicry. It was less about comfort, more about survival. Conserve energy, stay still, don't attract attention. And when the wind clawed at the walls, when it sounded like spirits shaking the hut just to see who'd answer, the silence inside had to be deeper. Not just the absence of noise, the refusal to acknowledge fear, the kind of quiet that made even the fire hold its breath. Still, no one slept deeply, not really. Because sleep, like everything else, could be interrupted by something uninvited. A knock, a scent, a shadow that didn't belong. And if that happened, the mother had to rise, baby still strapped to her back, and be ready to defend or flee or disappear. But what does fleeing look like when it's minus 30 degrees Celsius and your enemy moves faster than you? That's when the body's heat stops being enough. That's when the baby must learn the unspoken language of survival, through touch. In the Arctic night, where the wind howls like something ancient with unfinished business, sleep isn't taken, it's negotiated. You don't collapse into it. You slip into it, like you would into a cold river, carefully, with every muscle listening. And for mothers, there was never such a thing as sleeping alone. The infant stayed on her back, inside the moiety, even as she lay down. No transferring, no unwrapping. The pouch simply shifted position from vertical warmth to horizontal cradle, and the baby stayed pressed between her shoulder blades like a second heartbeat, still skin to skin, still wrapped in caribou fur and dried moss and whatever else kept the cold from breathing in. Beds, if they could be called that, were raised platforms layered with skins and thick hides. The idea was to put as much distance as possible between flesh and the frozen ground, but even then, the air snapped like glass if you dared move too fast. So nobody did. Sleep was a choreography of stillness. Mothers learned to turn without jostling, to adjust the feeding position in the dark, mid-dream, without waking either of them. If the baby twitched or whimpered, her hand was already there. Not clapping or rocking, just a firm palm against the chest, the weight of presence reminding the child, we're safe, we're hidden, we're warm. Even lullabies were more suggestion than sound. Sometimes they didn't sing at all. Instead, they breathed a pattern: inhale, exhale, pause, the rhythm of drifting. A kind of hypnosis passed through heat and scent. The baby learned to sleep by mimicry. It was less about comfort, more about survival. Conserve energy, stay still, don't attract attention. And when the wind clawed at the walls, when it sounded like spirits shaking the hut just to see who'd answer, the silence inside had to be deeper. Not just the absence of noise, the refusal to acknowledge fear, the kind of quiet that made even the fire hold its breath. Still, no one slept deeply, not really. Because sleep, like everything else, could be interrupted by something uninvited. A knock, a scent, a shadow that didn't belong. And if that happened, the mother had to rise, baby still strapped to her back, and be ready to defend or flee or disappear. But what does fleeing look like when it's minus 30 degrees Celsius and your enemy moves faster than you? That's when the body's heat stops being enough. That's when the baby must learn the unspoken language of survival, through touch. Words were too expensive. You couldn't spend them on babies who didn't understand syntax, and you certainly couldn't afford to speak them when silence was safer than any weapon. So Arctic mothers taught through touch, through skin and weight, and the shape of breath against a newborn's cheek. There were no nursery rhymes, no baby talk, no exaggerated vowels stretched like balloons for a cooing audience. Instead, there were fingers that tapped 3 times on a tiny shoulder to mean still, a thumb against the sternum to mean wait, a palm curved along the spine to say, I'm here, and nothing will reach you. Infants learned not by listening, but by sensing. They memorized the rhythm of their mother's breathing and synced their own to it. A slight change, a held breath, a faster exhale was enough to signal danger or calm, hunger or warning. Before a baby could speak, it could read her. Like wind reads snow. Even the act of affection, that universal, messy expression of love, was different here. No giddy tickles or loud smooches. A mother's love had to be invisible, delivered through constant warmth, perfectly timed adjustments, and the gentle rub of a cheek pressed to the inside of her wrist. Love, in the Arctic, came in quiet textures. The child responded in kind, not with giggles or cries, but with stillness, with widened eyes and the slight grip of a miniature hand around a scarf's edge. It wasn't obedience, it was comprehension, a recognition that sound was for later, much later. When the air outside stopped biting and the sky didn't glitter with frost, touch became language, breath became lullaby, and the silence between them wasn't emptiness. It was a dialogue far older than speech, a language passed from one generation of women to the next, never written down, never spoken aloud, and never misunderstood. Still, even the most carefully coded silence can't warm a hut. When the fire runs low and the wind pushes through the seams, even the strongest mother can't protect her child with gestures alone. That's when the body itself becomes the only source of heat, a living furnace in a world of ice. When the oil ran low and there wasn't enough driftwood or blubber to keep the flame fed, the fire simply wasn't lit, not because no one needed it, but because need didn't make wood grow. And so entire families lay down in the dark, not to sleep, but to keep each other warm, like meat packed in snow. But it was the mothers who carried the heaviest flame, not on their backs, but beneath their skin. Her body became the only barrier between her child and the kind of cold that didn't kill quickly. It whispered, numbed, and crept in while you dreamed. So she pressed the infant to her chest, or slipped them back into the amoti, now slightly loosened for the night. Her torso wrapped around them like a second womb, her legs curled in, her breath directed downward. It was architecture again, but this time, made entirely of flesh. There were rules. Don't shift too much. Don't let the child's nose press into the fur and block its breath. Don't sleep too hard, or you'll miss the subtle twitch that means the baby's cold. The child, meanwhile, curled instinctively toward her heartbeat, a sound it remembered from before it had a name. Sometimes the mother's own hands were blue, her feet stiff, but she kept the warmth centered, focused inward, hoarded in her chest like contraband, because the child came first. That wasn't philosophy, it was math. One body could save another, but only if the mother didn't scatter her heat foolishly. In the worst months, when storms turned the world into noise and wind and nothing else, some mothers barely moved for days. They became heat sources, blankets, breathing shelters. And if someone knocked at the hut, or called through the snow, or if dogs began to growl low in their throats, the baby wouldn't cry. It had already learned, stillness means warmth, and warmth means life. But stillness wasn't stagnation. It was deliberate, controlled, and it wasn't just about heat. It was about what left the body, what dripped, what leaked. Which brings us to diapers, or rather, to moss, and fat, and the subtle science of what happens when the body lets go. When the oil ran low, and there wasn't enough driftwood or blubber to keep the flame fed, the fire simply wasn't lit. Not because no one needed it, but because need didn't make wood grow. And so entire families lay down in the dark, not to sleep, but to keep each other warm, like meat packed in snow. But it was the mothers who carried the heaviest flame, not on their backs, but beneath their skin. Her body became the only barrier between her child and the kind of cold that didn't kill quickly. It whispered, numbed, and crept in while you dreamed. So she pressed the infant to her chest, or slipped them back into the amorti, now slightly loosened for the night. Her torso wrapped around them like a second womb, her legs curled in, her breath directed downward. It was architecture again, but this time made entirely of flesh. There were rules. Don't shift too much. Don't let the child's nose press into the fur and block its breath. Don't sleep too hard, or you'll miss the subtle twitch that means the baby's cold. The child, meanwhile, curled instinctively toward her heartbeat, a sound it remembered from before it had a name. Sometimes the mother's own hands were blue, her feet stiff, but she kept the warmth centered, focused inward, hoarded in her chest like contraband, because the child came first. That wasn't philosophy, it was math. One body could save another, but only if the mother didn't scatter her heat foolishly. In the worst months, when storms turned the world into noise and wind and nothing else, some mothers barely moved for days. They became heat sources, blankets, breathing shelters, and if someone knocked at the hut, or called through the snow, or if dogs began to growl low in their throats, the baby wouldn't cry. It had already learned. Stillness means warmth, and warmth means life. But stillness wasn't stagnation. It was deliberate, controlled. And it wasn't just about heat, it was about what left the body, what dripped, what leaked. Which brings us to diapers, or rather, to moss and fat, and the subtle science of what happens when the body lets go. There's nothing clean about survival. It doesn't come with wipes or powders or pastel-colored changing tables. Out there, hygiene was an act of ingenuity, not luxury. And when it came to keeping babies dry, warm, and alive, moss was the unsung hero of Arctic motherhood. Dried and softened, it became the perfect natural diaper. Absorbent, insulating, and most importantly, silent. No rustling, no shifting. Just a gentle lining, tucked beneath the baby in the armordi, or pressed between folds of fur when they lay beside their mothers. Moss was easy to collect in summer, then dried and stored in bundles, each piece a future act of protection. But moss alone wasn't enough. The real magic came when it was mixed with a thin layer of seal fat, or in some cases, the child's own urine, intentionally used to create a barrier. Sounds backwards, maybe, but it worked. The urine would freeze on contact with the air, creating a kind of icy seal that kept wetness from soaking deeper into clothing or skin. Better a frozen crust than a spreading damp that invited frostbite. Cleaning was done without water. Water was too dangerous. It turned to ice the moment it touched the air, or worse, the child. Instead, messes were removed with blades, scraped gently, or patted away with snow, which evaporated in the warmth of the mother's hands before it ever had the chance to melt. And there was ritual, not ceremonial, but habitual. A rhythm of checking, replacing, disposing, always done quickly, with practiced hands and no waste. Older women passed down tips, which moss felt best. How to detect irritation through layers of fur. Where to dispose of soiled pieces without drawing scavengers. This wasn't just parenting. It was biology and engineering and ancestral chemistry, refined over centuries by women who didn't write books or give TED Talks, but who knew, down to the muscle, what a baby needed to make it through the next cold night. And when the diaper was changed and the child was dry, there might be, if all went well, a lullaby. Not sung, whispered, felt, because even music couldn't be trusted to carry too far. So mothers invented a different kind of lullaby, one that never passed the lips. A lullaby in the Arctic wasn't meant to be heard, it was meant to be absorbed. Not broadcast across the room like a promise, but breathed directly into the skin like a secret. Mothers didn't sing to fill the silence, they sang to preserve it. The voice didn't rise, it hummed, low and close. The way one speaks to fire when coaxing it back to life. The sound never left the space between mother and child. It vibrated against a collarbone, settled into the hollow of a neck, buzzed beneath fur and fat and skin until it ceased to be sound at all. It became rhythm. Some of these songs weren't even melodies. They were breath patterns, passed mouth to forehead or nose to skin. A short exhale, a longer one, then a pause. The same timing used when soothing a dog, or waiting for a seal to surface. The child learned to match it, drift with it, fall asleep as if sleep were a current, and the mother a quiet tide. And if there were words, and sometimes there were, they weren't in the open. They were shaped against the lips, mouthed rather than spoken. A warning to unseen forces. This one is claimed. This one is watched. Some songs were charms disguised as affection. Others were ancestral instructions, spoken like code, designed to bypass the ears and settle somewhere deeper. There was an art to keeping a lullaby from escaping. The old women knew it. They taught it with nods, not lessons. Don't raise your pitch. Don't open your mouth too wide. Don't call the spirits down when what you need is for them to keep walking. And the babies, swaddled in fur and moss and heartbeat, learned to fall asleep, not to a tune, but to a frequency, a warmth, a breath that repeated until dreams came. And even in sleep, they remembered. Silence was safety. Stillness was love. But not every infant caught on. Some resisted, cried, refused to quiet themselves no matter the breath or pressure or whispered spell. And that's when training began. Not punishment, not cruelty, just a different form of education, one taught in the oldest dialect of all, survival. Babies cry. That's what they're supposed to do. But in the Arctic, crying wasn't a sign of life. It was an invitation. A sound loud enough to cut through snowstorms, to catch the ear of a predator or an enemy or a spirit who'd forgotten the boundaries between worlds. So mothers taught silence early, before language, before understanding. The lesson was in the body, not the mind. A mother would feel the tension begin, a twitch in the foot, a clenched hand, a quick inhale, and she'd act. A thumb to the lips, a shift of pressure against the chest, a sudden hush that filled the space like snowdrift. And if the child still wailed, she didn't shout, didn't panic. She held tighter, pressed skin to skin until the air left no room for sound. Sometimes she swayed, sometimes she simply waited, and sometimes, yes, she told stories not to the child, but to herself. Stories about what happens when a baby can't keep quiet. The woman with frost forefingers who steals noisy infants in the night. The fox spirit that follows sound until it finds heat. The man with the hollow eyes who listens beneath the floorboards. Not fairy tales, warnings. Older siblings joined in, too. They learned to hush the baby with gestures, with distraction, with tiny bits of fur or bone to grip in small fists. Silence became a shared responsibility. If the child cried, the whole hut tensed, because everyone knew what was at stake. Even when babies were allowed to make noise during safe seasons or in the heart of camp, the habit lingered. A quiet child wasn't seen as broken. They were seen as wise, as strong, as trustworthy. The kind of child who understood without ever needing to be told that some things were louder than they seemed. And so the skill passed on, from mother to infant, from sister to brother. A lineage of restraint, of breath held at the right moment, of stillness worn like a second skin. But beneath all that discipline, beneath the layers of moss and myth, there was something else. The unbearable weight of responsibility. Because to be a mother in that place wasn't just to keep the baby quiet or warm. It was to be the one who knew, in every moment, exactly how close death was. And to keep it just barely at bay. She didn't wear a crown. She didn't sit on furs and issue commands. But make no mistake, hers was the most vital role in the village. The one that couldn't fail. The one that didn't sleep. Motherhood in the Arctic wasn't painted in pastels or praised with poems. It was carved into bone, pressed into the back from carrying too long, etched into hands cracked from snow and salt and sleepless nights. It was sacred not because it was celebrated, but because it was the hinge on which everything turned. The mother was the hut's center of gravity. Her body held the future, not abstractly, not symbolically, but literally. She regulated temperature. She rationed food. She made judgment calls with consequences no one else dared shoulder. Do I use the last of the fat for light or for warmth? Do I feed the child now, or wait until the next seal is caught, if one is caught at all? And if she faltered, even once, if her grip slipped, if she slept too deeply, if she hesitated before wrapping her baby in that final layer of fur, the cost was immediate. There was no cushion, no buffer, just frost, and silence, and regret. But she didn't falter. Not because she was strong in the way people like to romanticize, but because there was no other option. The mother wasn't just protecting her child. She was protecting her own mother's memory, and her grandmother's, and all the women before her who had faced the same questions and answered with their bodies. Even in death, these women weren't mourned with loud ceremony. Their names lived in techniques, the way she tied the amorti flap, the rhythm of her silent lullabies, the kind of moss she preferred. You could tell who her mother had learned from by the way her child slept. And so it went. The sacred work continued, not passed down through scripture or song, but through gesture, fabric, breath. It was invisible to the outsider. Just a woman, maybe hunched in the snow, back steaming from heat. adjusting the weight of her child on her spine. But in that shape, that curve of fur and fatigue and fury against the cold, lived 1,000 years of skill, of sacrifice, of unspoken love, so exacting, it looked like silence. Not the silence of absence, the silence of survival. Fire is easy to love when the nights are long and the wind sounds like it's sharpening its teeth on your doorframe. But among certain Arctic and subarctic peoples, fire was a seduction best kept at a distance. Warmth wasn't just warmth, it was softness, indulgence, a dangerous trick of the senses. The moment it touched your skin, it told your body a lie, that the world was safe, and nothing in the tundra was ever safe. The belief ran deeper than survival instinct. In Siberian reindeer herding societies like the Ewenki or Nenets, the cold wasn't merely endured, it was respected as a kind of moral force. Warmth was for children, the ill, and the dying. Everyone else, they were supposed to feel the cold. The bite of it was discipline, the ache of it was instruction, and the numbness that followed, that was you learning your place in the natural order, small, fragile, and forgettable. Among the Yakut, for example, it wasn't uncommon for elders to warn young people that fire made men sluggish, that too much heat clouded the heart and the head. Some would even say that winter taught truth, because the cold didn't flatter you. It didn't care what your name was. It didn't remember your father. And when it wrapped itself around you, skin to bone, it gave you a simple choice: harden or die. There were practical reasons for this, of course. Fuel was scarce, blankets were few, but that's never the whole story. These weren't people merely surviving, they were shaping an entire philosophy out of ice. Sleeping with minimal cover, even during the harshest months, was often seen not just as doable, but desirable. Boys were expected to learn how to breathe slowly and press their limbs close to conserve warmth. Girls learned to sit still so long that snow gathered like lace along their lashes, and no one complained. Or at least, if they did it quietly, because in communities where weakness wasn't a private matter but a public hazard, indulgence could border on treason. Your comfort could cost someone else their life. So yes, a good night's sleep might mean curling beside a half-dead dog for warmth, or lying on ice-packed earth with nothing but a fur pelt over your chest. But it also meant you were one of the strong. You weren't being pampered, you were being tempered. Not everyone made it through those nights unscathed, but that was part of the point, and the training began early. Not in adolescence, not in some tidy rite of passage ceremony. No, the real testing ground for survival was the first breath, the first cry, and the snow-packed cradle it echoed into. They say the world begins with a slap, but in places like Chukotka or the Kolyma River Basin, it often began with snow. Among some Siberian peoples, the Chukchi, the Even, and others whose names the frost preserved longer than paper ever could, it wasn't unusual for a newborn to be introduced to life by being laid directly on the ground. Not a soft blanket, not a mother's chest, but cold-packed earth, or even fresh snow. Just for a moment, just long enough. The logic, if one can call it that, wasn't cruelty, it was calibration. A way to test whether the child had what it took to keep going. The belief was simple: if the baby could withstand that first sting, could scream back at the wind and not go silent, then perhaps the body was strong enough to keep its soul tethered. If not, well, some spirits were never meant to linger. Mothers often wept during this ritual, quietly, with eyes turned away, but they didn't stop it. They weren't expected to. A mother's softness was not the point. The community's endurance was in, while Western observers recoiled at the practice, scribbling down judgments in neat pencil underlined twice. They often missed what was visible only in stillness, a deep ancient trust that life, like winter, must be met head-on. In some reindeer breeding Nenets camps, the trial wasn't just about cold, but breath. A naked infant might be washed briefly in melted snow or icy stream water to shock the lungs into action. Midwives watched closely. Did the baby flinch? Did it cry loudly and then settle? Or did the silence linger too long? Breathing was everything. The tundra had no patience for weak lungs. And when the trial was past, when the child shivered, gasped, and then settled into the rhythm of the living, only then would the swaddling begin. But even that wasn't for warmth. The wraps were tight, almost stiff, designed to shape the body, not coddle it. Limbs pressed into form. heads kept firm and forward-facing. You were born into discipline. Love, if it came with rules. Of course, not every child made it through, but that too was part of the calculus. In an environment where food was measured in ounces and mistakes in corpses, softness was an unaffordable luxury. Survival wasn't democratic. The gods of ice didn't vote, and what they selected for, above all else, was quiet strength, the kind that didn't cry out once the snow touched bone. So you learned early that the cold was watching, listening, judging, and it would not be the last time you met it alone. Because childhood, like warmth, didn't last long, and the first time you slept through a snowstorm without fire, you were expected to understand that this, too, was love. And that first solo sleep, well, it didn't come in some cozy tent. It came out in the open, beneath stars as sharp as obsidian, surrounded by nothing but your own breath. The rules were always vague. You'd be told, vaguely, to walk, to keep walking until the firelight vanished behind you and the sound of dogs became memory. Then stop, lie down, and stay. That was it. Among groups like the Yukagir or the Northern Iwenki, coming of age meant coming to terms with solitude, not in daylight, not in ritual space, but under an indifferent sky that had seen too many children try and fail to prove themselves. It wasn't the snow that tested you. It was the silence. The long, terrible stillness where your breath became fog and then nothing at all. Clothing was minimal, sometimes none. The point was to feel it, the sting on the skin, the way your blood slowed without asking permission. And you weren't expected to sleep. In fact, sleep was a kind of betrayal. Your task was to endure the night, not escape it. Those who shut their eyes too long risked not opening them again. In some camps, elders left small markers, a carved bone, a painted stone, placed in the snow at a distance from camp. The child had to retrieve it before dawn without freezing, panicking, or making enough noise to attract predators. It was a game, if you believed in cruel games, a lesson, if you believed in kindness disguised as terror. Girls had their own trials, though less has survived in the telling. Some were sent out during their first bleeding, wrapped in nothing but woven bark or thin hide, told to make peace with pain and cold as twin companions. In the morning, they were expected to return with a gift from the snow, a tuft of wolf fur, a frozen flower, a story they wouldn't tell until much later. There were no applause rituals, no crowns of feathers or chants, just nods, sometimes a muttered phrase about having the eyes now, as though the cold itself had carved new ones into your face. You weren't the same. You weren't supposed to be. And if your hands shook when you drank broth the next day, no one mentioned it. The naked vigil was never recorded officially. Anthropologists sometimes caught whispers of it, vague allusions from men with scarred cheeks and teeth, gone grey from age and chewing frost. We used to send them out, one Yukagir elder said, to see what the snow would say back. What it said, usually, was nothing. But if you listened carefully, if you lay still long enough with the snow pressed against your ribs, it started to feel like a conversation, not with a god, with the animal you were becoming. And once you'd proven you could stay still in that cold, you were ready to learn the secret that firekeepers never spoke aloud, that heat, real heat, doesn't come from fur or flame, it comes from the marrow, and the body could be taught to burn from within. Some called it bone warmth, others called it the inner wind. But across the frostbitten corners of the world, in reindeer camps, mountain plateaus, and smoke-darkened tents, there was a quiet conviction that the human body, if disciplined enough, could become its own fire. This wasn't metaphor. Among certain Arctic and Himalayan communities, it was a skill, one trained in silence, like hunting or fasting. In the highlands of Tibet, it became formalized as tumo, a kind of yogic heat cultivated through breath control and mental focus. Monks would meditate in snowstorms, bare-chested, drying-soaked robes draped over their shoulders, with nothing but the steam of their bodies. But long before that practice was written down, similar instincts echoed in the far north. The Ewenki had no word for tumo, but they knew what it meant to survive without fire. Old men taught boys to breathe low and slow, to clench certain muscles while stilling the body, not to warm the skin that was a waste, but to keep the blood moving, the organs alert. You didn't shiver, you didn't tremble, you stoked. Hunters said that when the snow reached your belly, that aching numbness like being carved from inside, the worst thing you could do was panic. Cold feeds on panic. But if you curled in just right, placed your hands over your lower stomach, and breathed with the rhythm of an animal asleep in its den. A strange thing happened. The body stopped shrinking. It began to hold. There are records from 19th century ethnographies describing Evenki shamans performing cold dances, movements designed not to warm the body by motion, but to trigger something deeper, a rising warmth that had no clear source. One observer noted a shaman who would lie motionless in a snow pit for hours, then rise steaming, face flushed, eyes gleaming with something that wasn't madness, but wasn't sanity either. Among the Sami stories lingered of joik singers, ritual chanters, who could raise their body heat mid-performance, their voices pulsing with rhythm while snow melted in crescents around their feet. Whether it was breath, vibration, or something else entirely, no one could say. But they all agreed on one thing. The cold didn't just punish weakness, it revealed power. And that power, once found, changed everything. Because after you'd coaxed fire from your own bones, you began to look at snow differently. Not as a threat, not even as a test, but as something you could command. Which was important, because the next challenge wasn't surviving cold alone, it was surviving it together, without speaking, without flinching, without leaving anyone behind. Solitude may have forged the fire, but the tribe decided whether it could be trusted. There were rituals rarely named, almost never explained, where entire groups would lie down in the snow together, side by side, arms at their sides, eyes closed or fixed upward, like they were waiting for stars to whisper approval. These weren't endurance games, they were demonstrations, public silences carved in frost. In Samiwenki and Yukogia camps, this act was known simply as the lying. Initiates, newly returned from their solo trials, were placed shoulder to shoulder with elders who had long since proven themselves. No one spoke, no one moved. If your fingers twitched or you shifted your weight, you were noticed, not by eyes, but by stillness itself. The idea wasn't to impress, it was to match, to regulate your breath, your heat, your discomfort with the group. If one person broke, the whole circle broke. Some say the ritual echoed the behavior of wild herds in storms, animals huddling not for warmth, but for patience. The tribe wasn't warming each other, they were restraining each other from despair. Sometimes, this exercise lasted an hour, sometimes a full night. If the cold was kind, the snow remained dry and powdery. If it wasn't, ice formed beneath the back, gnawed at the spine. And your only comfort was the knowledge that the man beside you, the one who once bled into the snow on a failed caribou hunt, was also refusing to move. There's a tale, old and short, about a boy who couldn't stop shivering during his first group vigil. The elder beside him took his hand, not kindly, not cruelly, and whispered, "Breathe slower. Make the fear leave through your ribs." The boy didn't survive the night, but they say the elder never let go of his hand, not once. And there were stories of the opposite too, of groups that lay so still for so long, the snow drifted over them like a second skin, of girls who sang low songs in their throats without opening their mouths, of a silence so perfect that nearby wolves passed without noticing they were not alone. This wasn't just about survival. It was rehearsal. For hunts where one flinch could lose the prey. For ambushes where one breath too fast could cost lives. For winters when warmth was memory and all you had was each other's calm. Once you could lie still together in the snow, you were no longer just individuals. You were a body, one breath, one rhythm, and, as some elders believed, one offering. Because what slept in the cold wasn't always just human. Spirits had their own ears, and if you could lie still long enough, they might come closer, watch, judge, and if they approved, if you endured without begging, without heat, without song, they might even whisper back, but not in words, in visions, in dreams, in the unmistakable feeling that the cold itself was listening and nodding. In lands where warmth was rare, the cold was never just weather, it was a presence, a spirit, a judge. Among many Arctic and subarctic groups, frost wasn't merely a condition to survive, it was a force to be respected, sometimes even worshipped. The Chukchi, for instance, spoke of Cave Jew, a being of the north wind who could freeze the breath from your lungs if disrespected, or shield you from death if properly appeased. The Nenets believed in spirits that lived beneath the ice, silent watchers that moved with the snowdrifts, unseen but felt, especially when one was alone. Snow was not pure in the naive, poetic sense. It was sacred in a much older, much colder way. Every flake was a messenger. Every gust was a whisper from something vast and disinterested. The tundra didn't need prayers. It needed proof that your body could listen, that your spirit didn't flinch. Fire blinded you to the voices. Silence and cold made them audible. Some Iwenki shamans told of beings that fed on heat, on fear, on sweat. If you trembled in their presence, they drew closer. If you remained still, they watched and left. That's why so many rites of passage involved naked exposure. It wasn't just about physical toughness. It was a form of spiritual camouflage. The snow spirits ignored what didn't disturb the snow, and those who returned from their solitary nights often reported strange things. Dreams of animals speaking without mouths, of ancestors walking across frozen rivers, pausing to stare, of trees that breathed. Some of these visions were dismissed as tricks of the cold, hypothermia wrapped in metaphor, but the elders rarely corrected them. They knew better than to separate body from spirit. In this landscape, one's physical limits were one's spiritual capacity. Among the Yukagir, it was said that the cold didn't kill people, it selected them. Those who froze to death had been taken, not lost. The ice, after all, preserved, it didn't destroy. Frozen corpses were sometimes buried shallow or left above ground, not out of neglect, but reverence. The body became part of the land, a silent companion to the spirits of snow. And once a person had heard the cold, once they had survived the listening alone. Naked, without fire, they were different. They were quieter, not traumatized, but attuned. Like animals that had learned to walk over thin ice without alerting the wind. These were the people who could hunt in silence, who could walk for days without losing heat, who could lie in wait without needing sleep. But first, they had to learn how to breathe in the language of the frost, how to still the body so completely that the spirits of ice looked past them, or through them, or perhaps if they were lucky, into them. And if those spirits found no fear, only stillness, only steadiness, they passed on, leaving behind not warmth, but a strange fireless heat that pulsed beneath the ribs, the kind needed when the next rite arrived, the preparation for violence, for movement, for blood. To move through snow without leaving sound is one thing. To move through it leaving scent, without leaving fear, is another. And in northern hunting cultures, fear was the loudest trail of all. Before the hunt, and before the rare but decisive raid, groups like the Yukagir and even would undertake preparations that bordered on ascetic, fasting, cold sitting, controlled breathing exercises that left the mouth dry and the chest slow. The goal wasn't just to sharpen the senses, it was to exercise the warmth of hesitation. Hunters didn't bundle up before departure. That came later, once distance was covered. In the moments before leaving camp, it was common for men to sit half naked in the snow, legs folded, hands clasped over their sternum. They breathed as if asleep, eyes fixed on the tree line. Some would even smear snow into their armpits and over their necks, not to numb, but to still. Emotion, after all, gives off heat. And the animals were always watching. Among the Chukchi, certain elders taught that the breath could be shaped like a weapon. That to enter the forest without adjusting your internal rhythm was like carrying a blunt knife. So you learned to exhale slowly through the nose, count heartbeats with your spine, and dissolve the urge to twitch. Boys practiced this during their adolescence. By adulthood, it was unconscious. Cold exposure was the final check. If your body couldn't keep calm under ice, it had no business chasing anything with teeth. But it wasn't just the prey that demanded such control. Sometimes the hunt turned into war, often over herds, sometimes over insult, occasionally over ghosts. Raiding parties would sleep in the open the night before, back to back, eyes closed but limbs taut. You didn't speak, you didn't joke, you breathed, slowly, together. If you couldn't stay warm without a fire, you were a liability. If you flinched at the frost, you'd flinch at blood. This ritual cold-sitting blurred the lines between physical and psychological preparation. A warrior who could slow his own pulse beneath snow could also slow it behind a boulder, behind a tree, behind a man whose back was turned. There was no official training. The ice was your instructor. The silence was your curriculum. And once your mind could outwait the cold, it could outwait anything, even death. But of course, not everyone passed the test. Some reached for warmth too soon. Others coughed, or whispered, or let the heat of fear rise too close to the skin. These were marked, not with shame, but with a certain kind of sadness. You can't hunt well if the spirits of ice no longer trust you. And once that trust was broken, Even fire wouldn't save you, because the shame of failure wasn't private. It was watched. It was remembered. There were no scoldings, no formal punishments. But when someone reached for warmth too soon, when a boy snuck into the sleeping tent in the dead of night, or a hunter came, back wrapped too tightly in furs, the silence that followed was louder than any rebuke. In these communities, fire was sacred. But like most sacred things, it had rules. You didn't use it to hide from discomfort. You used it to cook, to purify, to signal, not to coddle. Warmth was a communal asset, not a personal indulgence. And the moment you treated it otherwise, you revealed something unbecoming. That maybe you weren't forged fully. That maybe the cold hadn't finished with you. Among the Nenets, there were quiet customs. The last to ask for heat was always the first to be trusted on winter hunts. Among the Iwenki stories were told of young men who refused warmth, even after injury, who would rather bleed in snow than heal by fire. Not because they wanted to die, but because dying strong was better than living soft. Children learned quickly. No one had to say it outright. If you whimpered in your sleep, an elder might cough loudly. If you huddled too close to the stove, someone might rearrange you, gently but deliberately. And if you ever cried from cold, there'd be a moment, just one, when all faces looked away. There's a folk tale, repeated in varying forms, about a girl who tried to heat a rock in secret and burned through the frost on her sleeping mat. The rock cracked, the tent filled with smoke. No one was hurt, but for the rest of her youth, she was called Fire Lover, a name delivered with such quiet disdain it might as well have been shouted. Yet this wasn't cruelty. Not really. It was maintenance, the slow, necessary sharpening of the group's edge, because one person's need for comfort could fracture everything. Warmth made people linger. Lingering got people seen. Being seen got people dead. And so you learned to love the cold. Or if not love, then respect. Or if not even that, then tolerate it silently. Which was enough. Because if you could endure the cold and not seek heat, if you could fall asleep with your toes burning from numbness and wake without complaint, then perhaps you were ready to understand what the cold actually meant. Not survival, not discipline, but something older, something that took as easily as it gave. Sometimes, the cold didn't teach, it simply took. The same rituals that hardened children into hunters also left behind a quiet trail of bodies. No monuments, no songs, just the knowledge, passed from elder to elder, that not everyone makes it through the snow. Among the Iwenki, there are whispers of boys found stiff and silent at dawn, their arms still folded across their chests in perfect posture. They hadn't failed the trial. Exactly, they had completed it too well, too still, too long. The snow, indifferent and final, had claimed them not in rebellion, but in acceptance. And these deaths were not spoken of with horror. They weren't even called deaths. They were passages, selections, proof that the cold still had the final say. If you died during your vigil, it meant the spirits had taken interest. You weren't pitied. You were remembered, not fondly, not with grief, but with a kind of reverent restraint. Your name became a caution and a compliment in equal measure. In some cases, when an initiate didn't return, the elders didn't send a search party. They waited. If the body was found days later, untouched by animals, lying peacefully beneath a soft blanket of drift, it was taken as a sign. The cold had judged, and the tribe would not interfere. Ethnographies occasionally describe these moments with cold precision, noting temperatures, ages, burial practices. But what they rarely captured was the moral ambiguity of it all. No one wanted children to die. But everyone understood that survival was a kind of ritual in itself, and rituals, by their nature, had consequences. And when the body was brought back, wrapped not in warmth, but in ice-stiffened fur, there were rules. No crying over the corpse, no lamentation. You sat with it. You acknowledged the life. You nodded, perhaps, and then you went back to work. This stoicism wasn't cruelty. It was efficiency. Grief spent too loudly was seen as indulgent, dangerous, even because the cold was still there, watching, measuring, and it had little patience for sentiment. But if a child survived the snow and came back changed, if they spoke less, moved slower, stared longer at the fire without reaching for it, then the tribe watched closely, because some didn't return empty-handed. Some came back marked, not with scars, but with a strange calm, a stillness that couldn't be taught, as if something in the frost had spoken, and they had listened, and survived, not despite the silence, but because of it. And when that happened, there was only one thing left to do: bury the ones who didn't survive, and prepare the next generation for the last test, the hardest one. The one no longer about proving yourself to the tribe, or even the spirits, but to the world that was coming. The world that didn't care about snow, or silence, or spirits. The snow is still there, the cold, still patient, but fewer bodies lie in it now, and fewer still return changed. By the mid-20th century, the quiet trials began to fade. Soviet policies swept through Siberia and the Arctic like warm wind through a frost garden, melting, softening, erasing. Children were sent to boarding schools. Tents were replaced with prefab housing. Fur-trimmed rituals were outlawed or laughed at, and the long silences that once filled the tundra were pierced by radio static and factory horns. For the Chukchi, the Owenki, the Yukagir, names the land knew longer than the governments that claimed them. The shift wasn't just about losing language or land, it was about losing frost, losing the shared, aching vocabulary of cold. Young people now wore coats. They were told to stay indoors. Teachers replaced elders, thermometers replaced instinct, and death by snow, once a sacred, if tragic, passage, became a bureaucratic failure, a sign of negligence, something to be mourned, not honored. Anthropologists visiting the far north in the late 1900s found the traces, stories half told by grandfathers, burnt prayer sticks left in the snow, drawings in soot on tent walls depicting figures curled in snowbanks, eyes closed, limbs relaxed. Memories lingered, but the practice, gone, mostly, or moved underground, into the realm of whispered dreams. And yet, in some places, the old rhythms still surface. A father who takes his child out one night to sleep under the stars, not for tradition, but just to see. An elder who refuses a blanket during the last days of life, saying simply, "I've made peace with the snow." In the lungs of a hunter who still breathes slow when the wind rises. In the silence between two people walking across a frozen lake, 20 steps apart, never speaking. The cold has a long memory, longer than archives, longer than states, and it may yet remember the children who didn't cry, the boys who breathed heat from their marrow, the girls who listened for spirits beneath the ice, the ones who slept naked in the snow, not to die, not even to survive, but to become something colder, something stronger, something that wouldn't melt, not even now.